Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today on the Charge Up Fairfax pilot program. Today, you're going to be hearing about how this program can help community associations such as HOAs and COAs overcome the barriers to installing on-site electric vehicle charging stations for both residents and guests. And today's webinar is being hosted by Fairfax County's Office of Environmental and Energy Coordination. My name is John Silcox. I'm the Public Information Officer for the office, and I'll be serving as host and moderator for today's webinar. My colleague, Emily Bohr, is also here, will be assisting with the webinar. And our featured presentation today is with Gina Weil. Gina is the project manager of Charge Up Fairfax. She's leading the development and implementation of the program. And she's worked in environmental policy for the last 20 years and joined Fairfax County following a career in federal government. So before we get started with the presentation, just a few housekeeping items for noting as we get started. This webinar is being recorded, so we'll send a link to the recording and the presentation slides to all attendees after the meeting. Additionally, all attendees will be muted with their cameras off during the presentation today. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, we do ask that you submit them through the chat portal on your screen. And if you're not familiar with Teams, the chat feature icon is shown there on the screen right now. You can click on the icon and then type your question in the chat box. And we'll be leaving some time for questions and answers after Gina's presentation, but we do encourage you to use that to register any questions that you have. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter, Gina Weil, who's going to share an overview of the Charge Up Fairfax pilot program and how HOA communities can apply. So take it away, Gina.
Thank you, John, and thank you to everybody joining us today. Today, I'm going to provide an overview of the Charge Up Fairfax pilot program and also discuss how HOAs can apply to participate. So Charge Up Fairfax is designed to help homeowner associations and condo associations provide at-home electric vehicle charging for residents and their guests. For the purpose of this program, when I refer to HOA communities, that also includes condos and cluster communities. The most common place to charge an EV is at home. For many people, that's the most convenient and affordable option. There's over 1,500 HOA communities in Fairfax County, and residents of HOAs may face unique challenges to at-home charging, especially if they don't have a private garage or driveway where they can easily plug in. Charge Up Fairfax helps residents of HOAs with these unique challenges. At-home charging is also an attractive amenity to many home buyers and renters. Once someone owns an EV, they're unlikely to consider moving to a community that does not offer at-home charging options. As a result, we're hearing from many HOAs that are exploring EV charging stations to make their community more appealing. Now, Charge Up Fairfax is designed to help HOAs with both the exploration and the installation of community EV charging stations. That means the charging stations must be accessible to all residents and their guests. The three-phase approach to the program is outlined here on this slide, and I'll go into greater detail on each of the phases in the following slides as well. So it starts with the HOA exploration. The community must first understand what their needs are. Once an HOA is selected for Charge Up Fairfax pilot program, they'll enter into the county engagement phase. Finally, the HOA implementation phase is when the HOA selects and hires a contractor to install their charging stations, and they may then request a grant to reimburse some of the costs after installation. So looking at the the HOA exploration phase, during this phase, the HOA must determine the best path forward for their community. We recommend that HOAs take the steps that are outlined here on this slide. That includes surveying residents to assess community demand and plan for the right number of EV chargers. It's critical to understand how many residents already own an EV or may plan to own one. The county has developed a sample survey that boards of directors may use to send out to residents, which is available on our webpage for everybody to download. It's also important to identify preferred charging locations. For this program, the charging stations and parking spots must be located on property that's owned by the HOA. The HOA should consider proximity to power. The closer the stations are to a transformer or an existing power panel, the cheaper and more feasible the project will usually be. Reference materials with additional considerations are available on the Charge Up Fairfax webpage to help with that site selection. And during this exploration phase, HOAs should examine their governing documents to ensure there's no restrictions on the installation of EV charging equipment in common area parking spaces. Communities may talk with their insurance company, their management company, and any legal counsel they may have to share their plans for community charging to understand any implications. HOA boards of directors should also consider how to pay for the community EV charging equipment. We recommend talking with residents about the plans to fund the charging stations. In addition to the cost of construction, equipment, and electricity, HOAs should budget for the operation and maintenance of the charging stations. Recurring charges may vary depending on the business model of the equipment that has been selected and the operating agreement that the HOA enters into with the equipment manufacturer. Once an HOA has done this groundwork, they'll be well positioned to submit their application to participate in the Charge Up Fairfax pilot program. Now, once an HOA has applied and been selected for the Charge Up Fairfax pilot program, they enter into the county engagement phase. So I would work with the selected HOAs to schedule an engineering site visit. County staff and technical leads who are contracted by the county will meet with the board of directors on site to look at the location that was identified in the application. Following the site assessment, the county will provide the HOA with a feasibility memo, and that memo addresses physical and environmental barriers, power needs, site conditions, and estimated costs and project timeline. The goal of the feasibility memo is to provide an HOA with the information they need to make an informed decision about how to move forward with their project. Finally, for the HOA implementation phase, the responsibility is again with the HOA. So the Charge Up Fairfax webpage will include resources to support HOA decision-making, including reference materials like information about relevant permits and code requirements. The board of directors will obtain quotes from qualified contractors. We recommend getting a few different quotes from licensed contractors. And the HOAs may wish to ask about the contractor's experience installing EV stations in HOA communities. If there's specific equipment that the HOA has already selected, they may wish to confirm that the contractor can purchase and install that preferred equipment. The board of directors should talk with residents about the costs and the options to move the project forward prior to hiring a contractor. The HOAs may work with the contractor to select and purchase equipment, to finalize project design, to work with the utility company on any power needs, for the equipment installation, and also for county permitting and inspection. Now, contractors may provide different levels of service. So before deciding who to hire, we recommend confirming that the contractor will provide all of the services the HOA is looking for. The implementation phase is on the HOA's timeline. So it's up to the community to decide how quickly they would like to move forward. The project must be complete before requesting reimbursement funds, though. So the request for reimbursement funds must be made to the county within 1 year of acceptance into the program. The county will review the request for reimbursement and the documentation submitted, and then process the reimbursement grant to the HOA. So let's talk more about the reimbursement grant program. The reimbursement grant is intended to help with the cost of installation. The eligible expenses include engineering design and installation, the EV charging equipment itself, electrical work that's necessary to power or install the charging stations, and the expenses that are and are not eligible are detailed further on the Charge Up Fairfax webpage as well. All HOAs that have been selected for the Charge Up Fairfax pilot program may request a grant to cover 1/3 of eligible expenses up to $5,000. HOAs will need to complete a form requesting reimbursement and submit that along with the Fairfax County inspection report of the charging equipment, receipts for eligible expenses, and a completed W-9 tax form. The request for grant funds must be made within 1 year of acceptance into Charge Up Fairfax. Some HOAs will qualify for a reimbursement grant of up to $10,000. So the county will use census tract data to determine whether the HOA is located in an area that's classified as having high or very high vulnerability in the Fairfax County Vulnerability Index, or if they're classified as disadvantaged in the federal government's Justice 40 initiative. When HOAs are selected for Charge Up Fairfax, they'll be notified whether they're eligible for a reimbursement grant of up to $5,000 or up to $10,000. Now, looking at the timeline for the program, applications for the Charge Up Fairfax pilot program are currently open. They will be accepted through November 12th of this year. Selections will be made in early December, and I will work with the selected HOAs to schedule the engineering site assessments. The selected HOAs will then move into the implementation phase of the program, and I'll work with the pilot communities to collect their feedback on program processes and materials so we can use that feedback to make any improvements to the program. Those who are participating in the pilot program will be moving forward with their projects while we're also preparing to ramp up the program further in 2024. We anticipate full-scale launch and accepting additional applications in spring of 2024. So now that we've gone through the exploration phase, hopefully you're ready to apply for the Charge Up Fairfax pilot program. Like I mentioned, applications are currently available on our website. And I encourage HOAs to download the application and really take your time filling it out prior to submission. It is a long and detailed application, so please do take a look at it early. All applications will be considered at the same time after the application period has closed, so there's no advantage to rushing to submit your application early. The link to submit the application is on the Charge Up Fairfax webpage, and it will take you to a form where all of the application materials can be uploaded. Please make sure you've included all of the relevant attachments and that your application package is complete. If you realize you may have forgotten an attachment, you can follow the link again to submit additional attachments as long as it's before that November 12th deadline. I encourage folks to also sign up for updates on the program at the bottom of the Charge Up Fairfax webpage. We'll use that to provide notifications when the program is accepting additional applications. And I also invite HOAs to reach out to me with any questions that you have about the program or as you move through the application process. My contact information is on the last slide of this presentation, and it's also on the application page of the website. Now, I'd like to thank you again for your interest in the Charge Up Fairfax pilot program and for joining us today. And I'd like to turn it back over to John for any questions.
Thanks, Gina. You shared some great information about the Charge Up Fairfax pilot program and how HOA communities can benefit from the financial and technical assistance offered through the program. As a reminder, if you do have questions, you can post them in the chat. I see we already have quite a few, so we'll get to those. Again, for those who may not have joined at the beginning, we are going to provide a link to the recording of this webinar and the slides that you see today to all attendees after the event, so you'll have access to that. So let's go ahead and start answering some of the questions that have come in, Gina. First question refers to some of the costs. Can you talk a little bit more about the costs? Our operational costs, are you referring to the use of electricity there? And is there a cost for the pilot participation?
Sure, there is no cost to apply and participate in the pilot program. The HOA is responsible for the cost of installation. So an HOA would actually hire the contractor. So the relationship is between the HOA and the selected contractor that's been hired. And so they would receive a quote from that contractor and accept it in order to move forward. So they would pay for the installation, the purchase of equipment, the installation, including labor, of that installation project, and then for the electricity for when the project is operational and in use. Many equipment manufacturers also have an operation and maintenance cost. It varies by the type of equipment you select. So some may have a monthly charge to service the equipment. If anything goes wrong, to provide software updates, that sort of thing. There tends to be a recurring cost for a lot of the manufacturing equipment. Not all of the equipment comes with an ongoing recurring cost. That's something that would be looked at when you're considering different equipment that you may select. We do have some resources on our webpage to help make the decision when you're selecting equipment. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks, Gina. One additional question related to that that was asked. Is there a limit to the number of HOAs that can participate in the pilot?
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a great question. We are looking at accepting approximately 5 additional pilot communities at this time with the November 12th deadline. We've been working with a handful of initial pilot program communities and plan to accept 5 additional communities at this time.
So I think you answered the question about how many HOAs you're going to be working with in the pilot. Can you talk at all at this point about how many HOAs might be accepted into the program on a yearly basis?
Yeah, we are. It will be more than the 5 at this time. I anticipate it would likely be approximately 10 to 15 next year. That's still being determined, but that is sort of an early estimation.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit more about what is sort of the average cost for an HOA to install like a EV charging station? I don't know if you can break it down to like what a single station would cost or something along those lines, but anything more you can speak to about the ongoing costs for installation, and then maybe even anything you can add about maintenance or additional costs beyond that.
Sure. Yeah, it's tough because it really can vary quite a bit. So what we're seeing for level 2 charging equipment tends to range for the equipment itself approximately between $6,000 and $11,000. It depends on the features that you're looking for. So some equipment may be equipped to take credit cards. Others you could select a reservation system. So residents may be able to reserve the time that they would like to charge. So it really does depend on the features that are included in the equipment that will impact the cost, of course. And the cost of the installation will also depend on the siting of the project. Is there already a power supply? How far is the parking from the existing power supply? Any trenching needs could be costly depending on how far that may be. So it really will depend on the specific project and the needs of your installation. In terms of the recurring costs, I don't have references on up in my screen right now, but I know it can be anywhere from free to, maybe I don't want to give a high number because I'm not exactly sure, but I would think it could be in the hundreds per year, but it's worth looking at the manufacturer that you're interested in and then digging into what those recurring costs would be. We do provide some links on our webpage as well to dig further into some of those resources.
Thank you. And I know some folks have asked about the website and the contact information, so we do have that up on screen now, so everybody can get that information. We've got some more questions here. Does the county engineering site visit include contact with Dominion Energy to determine power options?
So our contracted engineering firm does work with Dominion prior to providing the feasibility memo. So they will have already looked at what your power needs are and how many charging stations can be supported by your existing power needs, and also look at the desired number of charging stations you've indicated in your application. And then they'll work with Dominion to determine the size of the transformer that would be needed for your project. So that information will be included in the feasibility memo. It is preliminary information to give an idea of the scope of your work. So it will be important to work with Dominion to finalize that project design after you've hired a contractor and are ready to move forward. The intention is to give HOAs a sense of what is involved in their project so they have enough information to take those next steps.
Thank you, Gina. An additional question was someone was interested if there is a contact at Dominion that you have, or a recommendation on who to reach out to at Dominion if they need to do that.
Yeah, there is a page on their website. I can look that up and provide it after the fact. There's not one person who is charged. You would reach out to the general contact information on Dominion's webpage, and then they would assign somebody, probably based on your location and schedules, who could talk with you in greater detail about your project, and even come out. I know I've talked with other HOAs who have worked with Dominion directly and had them come do an assessment on site. So they're very willing to support HOAs.
Great, and we continue to get lots of good questions here. One of the questions I think you addressed early on, but maybe you could restate, Gina. Is this program strictly for HOAs, or are condominiums eligible?
Yes, thank you. Condominiums and cluster communities are absolutely eligible. We just use HOA as shorthand, so apologies for any confusion. We definitely hope to see a lot of applications from condo associations as well.
Another question is an HOA eligible for a single $5,000 reimbursement grant, or could there be multiple grants for multiple installations?
There is one reimbursement grant would be available per community as part of this program. Great question.
Another question we have is, do EV chargers have to be available to the general public to qualify for the program?
So the charging stations must be accessible to residents and their guests. So not the general public, but just residents and their guests. And we would leave it to the HOA community to decide the appropriate policy that meets the needs of their community.
So looking through our chat here, we've got some more questions coming in. One is, if the HOA gets a quote as part of the application, but then once chosen, the first step of assessment is a feasibility, and the government then telling us how much it will cost. Can you confirm that that's the process? So they would get the quote, and then the first step of assessment is feasibility, and then the county telling us how much it would cost. Do you want to explain the process a little bit
Sure.
more?
Yeah. So thank you. Sorry. So once an HOA is selected, I would reach out to the HOA community to schedule that site assessment. The engineering team and county staff would go meet with the board of directors at the location, at the parking spaces that have been selected in their application, and do a walkthrough of the site, talk about any questions or concerns the board of directors may have, and look at the distance to the power, take measurements and photos. And then the engineering team does a desk review, speaks with Dominion to compile additional information for that feasibility memo. And the feasibility memo would then be sent to the community, looking at the site conditions, environmental conditions, any barriers that may be in place, and provide a very rough cost estimate in addition to project timeline. So to give it a sense of what to expect with the project. I do not recommend using the cost estimate as a hard and final number. I think you'll find that once you reach out to contractors, the costs vary considerably depending on the contractor that you're speaking with. So the cost estimate is intended to provide an idea of the types of costs to look for. When you're looking at a quote from different licensed contractors, it will give you a sense of the type of cost to expect in your project and a ballpark of what they may be. So the actual costs will come from the contractors that you request quotes from, and then the community would make a decision to move forward with the contractors based on the actual quotes that are received.
Another question that relates to the process: would the county assessment be able to assist in identifying feasible power sources, or is that something the HOA would need to do prior to submitting the application?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Yes, it is in the application process, in the application document as well, to identify the power source. So we will need an initial indication of where the power would be coming from in order to move forward with those conversations with Dominion and for our engineers to do those calculations. So that would include looking, is there a transformer nearby? The parking, that's definitely something to consider. And we do offer resources on how to make a site selection. On our website, there's some resources that can help identify a nearby power source. If there's a power panel, that's another good indication that power is nearby. So some HOAs may have a HOA-owned facility like a gym or a common area facility, a lobby, something like that, where the parking may be close to. If there's an existing power panel, that's something we may be able to tap into to power the charging stations. So they would need to identify what the power source is. If there is no power source near your project, and that's the location that the HOA has decided to move forward with, you could indicate that on your application. If a transformer is, there is the ability to potentially install a new transformer where one does not exist, but it would need to connect to the grid. So depending on the distance, that could impact the cost quite a bit. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're looking at the feasibility and the cost of the project. The closer it is to a transformer or an existing power source, probably the more feasible and less expensive the project will be. And I'm no engineer, but that's just very generally speaking.
Thank you. Getting lots of questions here, and we're trying to get through as many of them as we can. We do thank everybody for their participation and engagement. Wanted to just note, we've had this question has been asked a couple of times. We are going to share a link to the recording and to the slides after the event, so that'll go out to everyone who registered. So if you're not able to stay on for the full program or are interested in getting the slides after the fact, we will be sending those out. One question we got was, will you be sharing any lessons learned from the current pilot participants?
Yes, absolutely. We will continue to work with the pilot program participants throughout their experience of reaching out to contractors through installation and after the fact as well, to glean everything we can about their experience and then share that experience with the broader community.
Thanks. Trying to look at some of the questions. There's some overlap here. So can you just confirm that the stations that we're referring to in terms of installation are level 2 charging stations, or is there a charging station, a universal charging station that would work with all EVs? Or I guess that's a second question related though.
Yeah, this would be for level 2 charging. That is for the program, it supports level 2 charging installations. And then in terms of recommendations for the type of charging equipment, I think, I think everyone is probably interested in this and watching the market to see which type of charging stations folks are tending to go toward. People can select whatever charging equipment they determine to be appropriate for their community. I would leave it completely up to the community. I know there are adapters, so if you do choose one charging equipment, one type of charging equipment, hopefully it would be accessible to all residents and their guests with a simple adapter if it's not initially designed for everybody.
I think we're also getting a couple questions about the vendors themselves. Can you speak to whether the vendors offer financing or leasing?
I will say for this program, it's in the terms and conditions document that the equipment must be owned by the HOA community, or they may contract for that as well. It would depend completely on the agreement that you enter into with the vendor. I'm not familiar with the terms of ownership with various vendors, but I think we're seeing a lot of companies that are emerging. So there may be some different styles and different preferences that you may be able to pursue. I'm hoping that we'll be able to learn some of these lessons from the pilot communities as well, see which direction folks tend to go when selecting charging equipment, and learn about what their considerations were when selecting that and choosing to move forward.
Also getting a question about, is there a way for residents to pay for the electricity they use, or is the HOA responsible for the cost of the electricity?
The utility account must be in the name of the HOA community. So it would be the bill would be charged to the HOA. It's completely up to the HOA how they would like to then charge users for the use of that electricity.
For those
And
HOAs, oh, go ahead, Gina.
I was just going to add that HOAs could also determine a structure, a cost structure that may charge residents a different price from their guests. You know, you may be able to charge guests a higher fee if that's something that's of interest as well. There's equipment that could support different cost structures if that's something that's important to you. Sorry, John.
No, no, you're fine. We're still getting a few more questions here. I know we're getting right at time now, but we'll try and get through a few more. Can you speak, Gina, to the question of, is there a minimum unit count for
No.
for HOAs who are applying?
There is not. We will ask for the number of charging stations that you're planning to install, but there is no minimum for the installation.
And one question relating to those EV stations, can solar power be used for EV stations?
Absolutely. That's a great question, and would love to see communities moving forward with solar as well. Solar is not part of the Charge Up Fairfax pilot program, so that's something to talk with qualified contractors about. But I think that's a great idea, and would love to work with communities who are exploring this.
Similar question related to solar. Are there county credits or incentives for using solar power that could dovetail with this grant? And I know, Gina, that there are some incentives for those who are installing solar in their homes. I'm not sure if there's anything that would relate to this specific program for EV charging.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. Solar is not my area of expertise, but that's definitely a great question to investigate further.
Yeah, we could certainly maybe follow up if we have additional information to share along those lines. A couple final questions here. Are HOAs eligible for funds from the Inflation Reduction Act, or do you have any information on that?
I'm not aware of any grant funds or IRA funds that HOAs could pursue at this time. There are incentives for the purchase of EVs. I know that's a great option for folks who are considering purchasing an EV. There is a website that is linked to on our Charge Up Fairfax webpage under the resources section. I believe it's Plugstar. You'll see that link there under incentives and resources. And it does keep track of any incentive programs. You enter your zip code, and then it will automatically locate any incentives that you may qualify for related to EVs in your zip code. So that's a great resource to check out. If anything changes, I would anticipate it would be updated there on that website.
Well, thank you, Gina. We've gotten a lot of great questions. I think we've gotten through most of them. But as we wrap up, I would just wanted to remind folks that that the information there on your screen provides you with resources related to the program. So there is information there about how to get to the webpage, contact information for Gina if you have additional questions that we weren't able to get to today. And we just want to thank everybody for joining our webinar today on Charge Up Fairfax. Please, again, look for an email with the presentations from today's webinar and a link to the recordings in the next few days. And again, if you want to learn more about the program, visit the website. You can see the URL there on the screen. There's also a section of the web page where you can sign up for updates on the program, so you can receive updates whenever there's new information, when the new application period's open and such. And again, you can contact Gina directly using the contact information on your screen. We thank you so much for your participation today. As a reminder, the application period for the Charge Up Fairfax pilot program will close on November 12th, so feel free to reach out with additional questions. And thank you so much for your participation, and have a great rest of the day.